The ambulance siren sliced through the Los Angeles night. A sound lost on Kevin as he huddled in a shadowed alleyway. His stomach gnawing at him. He barely registered the noise. His world had shrunk to the gnawing hunger and the gnawing fear. The city glittered with wealth. A cruel contrast to his own stark reality. He clutched the tattered photograph of his daughter, Lily, her smiling face a painful reminder of the life he'd lost and a fragile talisman against the despair threatening to engulf him. He had nothing left but this photo and a cardboard sign that now lay ripped and discarded a few feet away. Earlier that evening, as he attempted to scrawl a plea for help, a group of teenagers, fueled by alcohol and boredom, had snatched the sign, laughing as they tore it to shreds. The act was small, but it felt like a final blow, robbing him of the last vestige of his dignity. He'd tried to fight back, but weakness and hunger had rendered him helpless. Now, the remnants of the sign were a harsh symbol of his powerlessness. He curled tighter, his bones aching against the cold concrete. Was this how it ended? Alone, forgotten, slowly fading into the city's anonymity? He pulled Lily's photo closer, a silent prayer forming in his throat. Please, someone, help me, for her sake. Clint Eastwood sat alone at an outdoor cafe on Melrose Avenue, the low hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware barely registering in his mind. His denim jacket and sunglasses shielded him from the casual stares. But even disguised, his presence commanded attention. He sipped his coffee, his eyes scanning the street, a flicker of something unreadable within their depths. It was a familiar haunt, a place where he could momentarily escape the gilded cage of Hollywood. He appreciated the anonymity, the chance to observe without being observed. Kevin, driven by the pangs of starvation and the ghost of his daughter's hopeful face, reluctantly approached the cafe. He felt a surge of shame, but the desperation was stronger. He recognized Eastwood, the legendary actor whose films had once filled his own comfortable living room. Now, he was approaching him as a beggar. He hesitated, then steeled himself, his hand trembling as he reached out, almost apologetically, towards Eastwood's sleeve. Excuse me, sir, I'm so sorry to bother you. I just need $1, to get something to eat. Anything. The moment Kevin's fingertips brushed Eastwood's denim jacket, a jolt of electricity seemed to surge through him. He wasn't just asking for money, he was reaching out for a lifeline. A photographer, hidden across the street, snapped a picture, capturing the encounter with a detached and opportunistic lens. Eastwood looked up slowly, his gaze piercing, assessing. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them suspended in a shared space. $1 won't get you far, Eastwood said, his voice low and gravelly. Sit down, tell me what happened, tell me your story. As Kevin settled into the chair, his body ached with weariness. The cafe buzz faded into background noise as he began to unpack the story of his fall. He spoke of his thriving construction business, the beautiful home he'd built, the loving wife and daughter who had filled his life with joy. His voice cracked as he recounted the events that had shattered his world, a bad investment, a supposed friend who had absconded with his life savings, leaving him drowning in debt. He spoke of the shame of losing everything, the agony of watching his family crumble under the weight of his mistakes. With each word, each painful detail, the cafe around them seemed to fade further into the distance. The clatter of dishes, the chatter of patrons, were all silenced as he poured out his heart to the man across from him. His voice caught as he described the loss of his family, the pain in Lily's eyes when he told her they had to sell their house. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal, Kevin said, his voice barely a whisper. I trusted him, and he took everything. Clint Eastwood listened intently, his expression unreadable, but Kevin sensed a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Still, he struggled to believe that a man of such privilege could truly comprehend the depths of his despair. Doubt gnawed at him, whispering that this was just a fleeting moment of sympathy, a hollow gesture from someone who could never truly understand. A bitter laugh escaped him. You don't get it, Kevin spat, more to himself than to Clint. You've never had to crawl through the dirt. Clint's gaze intensified. Haven't I? You'd be surprised what kind of dirt I've been through. The weight of Kevin's story hung in the air, heavy and palpable. Clint leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. He studied Kevin, his gaze unnervingly intense. So, what's next? He asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Kevin scoffed, frustration bubbling to the surface. Next? There is no next. I'm just trying to survive. Trying to make it through the day. The helplessness was beginning to resurface. The desire to just give up and succumb to the overwhelming misery. Just then, a drunk staggered towards their table. His eyes glazed and unfocused. He slurred insults at Kevin, calling him a bum, a parasite. Eastwood rose to his feet, his posture radiating a quiet but potent authority. "You need to move along," he said, his voice low but firm, warning to any trouble. The drunk, sensing the unspoken threat, mumbled an apology and stumbled away. The small act of protection, the simple demonstration of respect, jolted Kevin. He looked at Clint with a new sense of possibility in his eyes. He was still unsure how to proceed, but he knew this man was something different than what he had originally thought. Eastwood sat back down, his gaze softening slightly. "That kind of scum is always out there. You cannot let them dictate your life, or you are already beaten. Done for." "You're not beaten, are you?" he said in a commanding tone. "This is the life you're choosing. The existence you want?" Kevin looked down, ashamed, knowing he'd been asking those questions of himself for the longest time. Eastwood's gaze softened as he took in Kevin's gaunt frame and weary expression. "Look," he said, his voice gentler now, "I haven't always had it easy. Grew up poor during the Depression. My dad worked his hands to the bone just to put food on the table. We knew what it was like to struggle, to feel like the world was against you." He leaned back, his eyes drifting towards the bustling street, his mind miles away in his past. "I remember one winter when we barely had enough coal to heat the house. My mom would wrap us in blankets and tell stories to keep our spirits up. She taught me that even in the darkest times, there's always hope, always a reason to keep fighting." A slight smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "When I first came to Hollywood, I slept on friends' couches, worked odd jobs to pay the rent. Rejection after rejection. More than once, I thought about packing it all in and going home." He chuckled softly, "But something inside me wouldn't let me quit. I knew I had something to offer, and I wasn't going to give up until I had my chance." He paused, his gaze returning to Kevin. "The point is, everyone faces hardship. The key is to never give up on yourself." Eastwood reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. It wasn't a fancy card, just plain white with a name and address printed on it. "This is a friend of mine. He runs a shelter not too far from here. They offer meals, a place to sleep, and job training. It's not a magic bullet, but it's a start, the first push you need. Or anything." He placed the card on the table, but before Kevin could reach for it, a gust of wind swept through the cafe, snatching the card and sending it spiraling into a nearby drain. The moment felt laden with symbolism, a sign that Kevin wasn't meant to escape his fate. Kevin slumped back in his chair, defeated. "See, even the universe doesn't want me to get better," he muttered, feeling the hope that had flickered to life moments ago extinguished. Eastwood didn't react, didn't try to retrieve the card. He simply watched Kevin, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and disappointment. "Don't you dare give up now," he said, his voice surprisingly stern. "You think the card was the answer? No, the answer is within you. You have the power to change your life, but you have to choose to use it. Now, that paper is gone. Do you have a pen? Because this time, it's all on you." He handed Kevin a pen and told him the center's information, testing to see what Kevin could do. Kevin spent the next few days in a state of agonizing indecision. He clutched the scrap of paper with the center's information, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't continue living on the streets, but the thought of entering a shelter filled him with dread. He remembered the promises that had been broken before, the hopes that had been dashed. One night, shivering in the cold, he had a vivid dream about Lily. She was standing in a park, surrounded by other children, but she looked sad and lonely. He tried to reach her, but he couldn't move. He woke up in a cold sweat. The image of his daughter's forlorn face seared into his memory. He was done giving up and trying to lie his way through things. He was done being broken. Because if he was, Lily would be too. He had to find a way out of this darkness. Not just for himself, but for her. The next morning, he boarded a bus heading towards the shelter, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He was stepping into the unknown, but he was finally taking control of his destiny. Stepping into the shelter felt like entering another world. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and the murmur of voices. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the faces of the other residents. Kevin felt exposed, out of place, as if everyone was judging him. He was directed to a small waiting room, where he sat huddled in a corner, trying to make himself invisible. A disheveled man with wild eyes approached him, muttering about government conspiracies and alien abductions. Kevin shrunk back, overwhelmed by the chaos and despair around him. Just as he was about to bolt, a kind-faced woman approached him, her eyes filled with warmth and compassion. "Welcome," she said, her voice gentle. "We're here to help. What can we do for you?" Kevin hesitated, then slowly, haltingly, began to tell her his story, the weight of his burdens finally beginning to lift. The days that followed were a blur of appointments, paperwork, and therapy sessions. Kevin was assigned a caseworker who helped him navigate the complexities of the social welfare system. He received medical care for his ailments and began attending group therapy sessions. He started sleeping in a bed, eating regular meals, and felt like a human being for the first time in years. One day, he met a fellow resident named Sarah, a former soldier who had lost her home after suffering from PTSD. They bonded over their shared struggles and began to support each other. Sarah taught him coping mechanisms for his anxiety and encouraged him to pursue his passion for carpentry. Slowly, the spark of hope that had been dormant for so long began to flicker to life. With the help of the shelter, Kevin secured a job washing dishes at a local diner. The work was grueling and the pay was minimal, but it was a start. He took pride in his work, scrubbing the plates until they gleamed, finding satisfaction in the simple act of creating something clean and orderly. One evening, as he was leaving work, a group of teenagers surrounded him, taunting him about his past. "Hey, it's the bum," one of them shouted. Kevin clenched his fists, his anger rising to the surface. But then he remembered Lily, and the promise he had made to himself. He took a deep breath and walked away, refusing to let their negativity drag him down. As Kevin slowly rebuilt his life, he found himself thinking often about Clint Eastwood. He knew he owed him a debt of gratitude, but he wasn't sure how to repay it. He couldn't give him money, but he could do the next best thing. One evening, he sat down and wrote Eastwood a letter, pouring out his heart onto the page. He described his struggles, his progress, and the hope that he had rediscovered. He thanked Eastwood for seeing something in him, for giving him a second chance. He sealed the letter and mailed it, a small offering of gratitude to the man who had changed his life. Days later, he finally built up the courage to contact Lily. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with hesitations and unspoken words. But as they talked, Kevin felt a connection rekindle, a sense of hope that they could rebuild their relationship. He knew he had a long way to go, but he was finally on the right path. Weeks later, Eastwood received Kevin's letter. He read it carefully, a rare smile gracing his lips. The struggles he had faced were what made his successes possible, something he had tried to teach Kevin. As he sat in his quiet office, he replayed the events of that day at the cafe, the face of Kevin as a broken, empty man, in a cycle of endless pain, and how a chance encounter had provided a light, a possibility. Then, the phone rang and a producer was on the line, asking if the recent newspaper article about Eastwood giving money to some bum was going to negatively impact the new movie. Eastwood hung up and called Kevin, and a genuine warmth spread through him as he heard the other man's voice. In the background, Eastwood heard a small girl and Kevin, who whispered to Lily that it was Clint Eastwood. A bond had been forged. Inspired by his own journey, Kevin began volunteering at the shelter where he had found solace. He shared his story with other residents, offering them words of encouragement and support. He became a beacon of hope in a place that often felt devoid of it. Kevin went on to start his own construction company, hiring people who had gone through hard times. Months later, Kevin and Eastwood, now friends, stood together at a charity event. Speaking about the importance of giving back, Kevin looked out at the crowd, his heart filled with gratitude. He had come a long way from the streets, but he would never forget where he came from, and he would always be grateful for the kindness of a stranger. The legendary Clint Eastwood, who had given him a chance to rewrite his story. This time, not only was Kevin no longer living in darkness, but his light was shining and allowing so many others to see the same.